Hi there, hello, it's me, Atlas. Welcome back. Today, to continue on after finishing up the Dark Souls trilogy, we're pulling out of the backlog Bloodborne. I haven't played many games on PlayStation, so we'll see how this goes. I have to create a new character, then the game opens to a haggard old man forcing me to sign some sketchy contract. Then he starts putting his blood into me. Very gross. I pass out for some vague amount of time and wake up to a werewolf trying to eat me. It bursts into flames, then some creepy tiny people swarm me. I then wake up inside a clinic. Moving through, I get ambushed by another werewolf and die for the first time. This takes me to the Hunter's Dream, a creepy Victorian mansion surrounded by graves with an odd doll out front. This is the hub world of this game, where I find my first weapons. I go with the saw cleaver and the hunter's pistol, and some useful NPCs. I return to the clinic, get my revenge, and escape. Outside is what looks like an endless city, styled after Victorian London. It's bathed in a harsh orange sunset as I get jumped by villagers. I find blood vials on the ground, which are the healing items of this game. I guess being a hunter means that I can just heal myself by injecting blood. I also find Molotov cocktails, which are a little anachronistic considering the Victorian period was in the 1800s and Molotov cocktails are named after Vyacheslav Molotov, a USSR foreign minister known for such hits as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Contract. They were named in mockery when Molotov said that the bombings of Finland during World War II were actually airborne humanitarian food deliveries. Anyway, where was I? I move through the streets where I find mobs of villagers. They seem to have formed mobs to kill monstrous beasts that have invaded Yharnam. The city is called Yharnam, by the way. But their minds have been poisoned and see other humans as the beasts. I keep pushing through until I reach a raised road where I find some more of the werewolves from earlier. There's something at the end of this road, but I completely miss it for now. I eventually drop down into these sewers with a giant pig at the end. Behind him, a ladder takes me up to my first boss of the game. I enter a large graveyard where a man is hacking away at something. It appears to be the man hovering over us at the start of the game. This man is Father Gascon, another hunter, but he seems to have been driven mad because as I enter, he turns to attack me. He attacks with a large axe in one hand and a shotgun in the other. He swipes viciously at me, dodging many of my attacks. As he kills me, he says, "About to show your true face, eh?" Suggesting that he too thinks that I am some kind of monster in disguise. I return to the Hunter's Dream, but this time the doll is standing and speaks to me. When I entered the graveyard earlier, I was given something called Insight. You see, Bloodborne takes much inspiration from Lovecraft's cosmic horror. The biggest portion being this mechanic. You see, in the literature written by H.P. Lovecraft, there are many monstrous creatures beyond human understanding, and when a human observes these beings, the slightest insight or understanding of them affects the world around them, frequently driving them insane. In Bloodborne, this concept holds true. This is why the villagers and Father Gascon have been driven mad. And by gaining some insight myself, this doll is given life. She also functions as the leveling system. As I continue fighting the Father, I eventually get him down to half health, which begins a transformation. The Father shifts into a werewolf, much stronger than the others I've met so far. He slashes viciously, smashing the graves around us. As he falls, he drops the key to the tomb of Odin. At the back of the graveyard is the gate that the key goes to. It leads into a cathedral where I find an NPC who asks us to send other citizens of Yharnam to Odin for safety. I step outside into a tighter portion of the city and continue wandering. I find a congregation of enemies around this building that had a secret staircase to another portion of the city. As I step through this latest set of gates, I hear a voice calling out to me, telling me to turn back. The courtyard is filled with burning corpses which stand as an omen, but not good at listening to orders, I continue forward. About halfway, a hail of bullets begin raining down on me from the rooftop. As I get closer to the tower, the enemies grow thicker, but I reach a point where the Gatling gun fire can no longer hit me at this angle. I slide down a ladder into a lower portion of the city where I get ambushed by even more werewolves. As I weave through the winding streets of Lower Yarnum, it eventually ends, letting out into a field of burning corpses with the ruins of a church at the other end. Inside was a gruesome monster called the Blood-Starved Beast. Its moves were animalistic, similar to the werewolves from before. Otherwise, it wasn't terribly difficult with the help of my good friend Alfred. With this, I unlock something called Chalice Dungeons. They are these optional dungeons accessed from the Hunter's Dream. They, in lore, were a source of accessing the outer beings for study, but unfortunately they aren't terribly interesting gameplay-wise. They are all formatted the same way, with a couple rounds of mazes filled with enemies where you have to find a switch that opens the door to the next floor. Then there's a boss at the end of each dungeon. The bosses were interesting, but the maze portions were ultimately quite tedious. I think a boss rush version of this could be quite interesting, but for now I'll skip over them. Back in Yarnum, I had become quite lost. Unsure to the way forward, I check the wiki and realize I've forgotten something. Back on that overpass towards the beginning of the game, past the werewolves, was another boss fight. This one was the Cleric Beast. It seems to have been intended to be the first boss, which, if I had encountered it that early, it probably would have been quite difficult. But as it was now, I floored it quickly and went on my way. Not wanting to miss any quest lines, I spent a good amount of time looking for NPCs. There was this lady found right after Odin Chapel, where I sent her to immediately. There was this hunter Eileen the Crow, but I failed to figure out her questline. And finally, there is this little girl that you can speak to through a window. She initially gives me a little music box, and tells me about her mother leaving in search for Father Gascon. After the fight, I can find a red brooch that belonged to the girl's mother, indicating that she had died. Spoiling the rest of the mission, I look ahead in the wiki and find that if I give her the brooch, she leaves the safety of her room to go find her mother, and dies as well. So, I don't do that. And having had enough of depressing stories for now, I look for my next boss. Outside Odin Chapel is an area called the Cathedral Ward. I merely passed through it earlier, but I returned to it now. The whole area is built around a hill, with many intersecting paths all leading towards the top. At the top is the main cathedral of the Healing Church. The Healing Church roots its origins from studying the outer beings, the great monster looming over the story of Bloodborne. As time moved forward, the threat of these monsters grew, and so the church institutionalized the hunters as a force to fight them. Simultaneously, they were also researching rituals called blood ministrations. These rituals studied the outer beings, but the knowledge gained during them frequently led to the ritualists going insane, or even to be transformed into the very monsters their hunters disposed of. As I approached the main cathedral, a hunched figure prays at the main altar, grasping a talisman. But my presence caused her to transform into a giant humanoid wolf with antlers lashing out at me. Vicar Amelia is the last of the vicars, preserving the Healing Church. But their foolish delving into eldritch knowledge resulted in her mutation. And with her death, the Healing Church has died as well, ushering in a night of terrors. Literally. After interacting with the altar, the sunset will end and night comes. However, addicted to double-checking the wiki at this point, I notice that many things become inaccessible after shifting to night, so I hold off and go explore some more. For starters, on the approach to the church, there is a side path that takes me to Hemwick Charnel Lane. It's a country road littered with graves everywhere you can see. Eventually, the road reaches a seaside view with a large castle in the distance and a smaller one at the end of the road. Inside was a large open space, clearly an arena of sorts, and as I reached the middle of the room, an inky black monster wielding a scythe appears with a smoky red light. I attack it, but the boss bar doesn't move, and I can kill it easily. Moments later, another red light gleamed and the monster spawned again, but across the room this time. Upon the third summoning, I investigated the location of the glowing light and find a hag that is invisible unless you are close. She would teleport away soon after attacking her. Halfway through, she began summoning body doubles as well, but overall, she didn't give me any trouble. Back in the Cathedral Ward, there was this enemy that carried around a sack with him called the Snatcher. Upon killing me, he transported me to a dark prison in Yahagul, the unseen village. The door was open, so I began to explore. Down some nearby stairs, there was a sobbing nun, and up some stairs was a much larger chamber. Perhaps a courthouse? There were snatchers everywhere, so I was forced to just run by them. Yahagul itself was a long street with towering buildings on either side, as well as a couple of pigs. Both sides of the street were blocked by large doors that I could not open. On a pathway overlooking the street, it diverged into the dark insides of a building and then transitioned into a tight cave. This, in turn, led to a dimly lit field before a giant gateway. It was guarded by a giant monster, coated in lightning, called the Dark Beast Parl. It sported the beastly moveset of some swipes and bites, spiced up with some electric bursts, but was otherwise no trouble. The giant door opened, revealing Old Yarnum once again. Entertained by this connection, I wandered around Old Yarnum once more, where I discovered another ladder that took me all the way up this tower, behind the retired hunter Jura. Earlier, when heading through this area before, he was the voice who called out, telling me to turn back, and when I did not, he was the one opening fire on me with the Gatling gun. When I reached the top of the tower, he opened fire on me once again, so I finished him off. Jura used to be a hunter as well, but grew too old for it, so he spent his days defending the populace of Old Yarnum. He knew of their condition, their sanity-deprived state, but he pitied them, and so he spent his days protecting them, until I stumbled upon him. Pitifully, there is even a way to let him survive, but I failed to meet the conditions to do so. Having run out of paths to follow, I returned to the Tomb of Odin. Connected to the side of it was an elevator that took me up to another portion of the Healing Church, the Healing Church Workshop. After institutionalizing hunters, they looked to the original hunters for their example. The hunters had their own workshop where they created weapons, studied, and planned for their subsequent hunts. The Healing Church created a tower that would function the same way. However, it was less refined, and over time, the corruption infesting this world took control here as well. And when I jumped down the tower from rotting wood platform to platform, I can see just what the original Hunter's workshop looked like. It seemed familiar due to the fact that the Hunter's dream is modeled after the original workshop. This place was in far better shape than the church's workshop, though it still looked like it had been ransacked. Satisfied with my exploration, I returned to the main cathedral, ready to enter the night. When interacting with the skull, I see a vision of two men speaking. The elder reminded the younger to fear the old blood. As I leave the cathedral, the evening had turned to night, so I go to a door in the cathedral ward where I had been before. It required a password, but I did not have it at the time. This time, however, I knew to fear the old blood. This gained me access to the Forbidden Woods, a dark and misty forest that essentially doubled as a graveyard. Even as I reached a village, it felt as if the village was a grave for the not yet dead. Passing through, I reach a house on a hill, and on its roof was a man crouching over 3 fresh corpses. Feeling something was off, I attacked, and the man turned into a werewolf with electricity coursing through its fur. He wailed about the evils of the hunters, that they were simply murderers, but upon closer inspection, one of the corpses was that of a child, and I'll be damned before taking moral advice from a child murderer. Having reached the end of the village, I continued through the forest. The enemy shifted into these bundles of snakes, their elder brother, and these bulbous alien-looking things. Another graveyard waited for me at the end of the forest, with 3 masked figures called the Shadows of Yharnam blocking my path. Individually, they each had a signature weapon and flaming attack, but were not so strong. But together, they would guard each other, leaving few openings, so my method was to simply single them out one at a time. And with these obstacles removed, I have reached Bergenworth. But first, another detour. There was an area that I had not reached before that took a bit of an odd path. If I go to this location near the cathedral after the night arrives, a glowing ball of light appears in a sweeping motion. If I am struck by it, I am caught by an invisible monster that crushes me and teleports me to another place. It then becomes visible as a voice rings out. It is called an amygdala, fitting for such a fear-inspiring creature. The amygdala transported me to a lecture building, truly the worst thing it could have done. But this wasn't a regular lecture building. It was a nightmare realm which, despite its name, is a physical realm created and lived in by the Old Ones. This lecture building was more of an entrance, because when I opened the doors to leave, a smoking portal greets me, taking me to the nightmare frontier. These lands host many monsters, including Patches? Apparently Patches is a spider in this game. Huh. Serves him right. Ruling this area is another amygdala, except this one is much stronger due to being in the nightmare realm. It's faster, dripping poison, and shoots lasers from its face. It proved difficult to deal with, especially when I spawn all the way at the beginning of the area. And after defeating it, I received another of the chalices used for the chalice dungeons. This place really is a nightmare. Next, I returned to Hemwick Charnel Lane. As I reach the end of the road, a carriage has arrived that takes me to the castle out in the sea. It drops me off at the front gates of Canehurst Castle, an imposing, snow-laden castle filled with ghosts. I started by going in on the left side and hooking back right on top of the wall. The right side hosted a gigantic library with multiple floors and more ghosts. Climbing to the roof from the top of the library, I can climb around this thin roof until I reach the top of the castle. Here I am confronted by the martyr Logarius, an undead sorcerer blocking the way forward. He fires off several red skulls and a black sphere, both of which track me. After reaching half health, though, he switches to wielding a scythe with surprising speed. Additionally, he can only be parried from a single attack where he floats into the air and then spin dashes at me. He has such long range and attacks so fast that the hardest part of the fight is finding a gap to get a hit in. After defeating Logarius, a crown is dropped, and equipping it reveals a new portion of the castle. Inside, I meet Queen Annalise, the last of the family Vilebloods. They are, or rather were, a family of vampires that have been wiped out by the martyr Logarius. But now I have freed her, though she seems rather down on herself, so I doubt there is anything to worry about. Finally, I return to Bergenworth. It is a small seaside mansion that housed the first of those who studied the Old Ones, later forming the Healing Church. On a balcony overlooking the sea, an old man sits. He is Master Willem, the head of Bergenworth. In the cutscene from when we shifted the world to night, we saw him talking to an unseen figure named Lawrence. As the head of Bergenworth, Willem taught all sorts of knowledge, but his adage, "Fear the old blood," was a warning to not delve into the insight gained from the blood of the old ones. But Lawrence believed that this was the key to some sort of enlightenment. So he founded the Healing Church in hope of delving into the blood of the Old Ones without succumbing to it. But the blood ministrations proved too much for anyone to handle, and the church only served as fuel for the Old Ones returning to this world. And here Willem sits, overlooking the Moonside Lake where an Old One resides. Stepping into the lake, I am transported to an infinite moon lake where Rom, the vacuous spider, resides. The moon spider sits atop the lake, summoning smaller spiders to defend Rom, teleporting around while casting an icicle storm spell from a distance. Rom gave me an inordinate amount of difficulty. I, for some reason, really struggled to avoid this icicle attack. But eventually, I finished Rom off. As its corpse faded, a white figure could be seen in the distance. As I approached, I began to make out a woman in a wedding dress with her head bowed. The front of her dress was covered in blood. As I reached her, a red moon rose to an infant's crying, and I awoke back in Yahagul. This time, I was atop the buildings that flanked the streets below, and the night was now out with all its fury. The moon had stayed red, tinging the sky purple, and the monsters were out in force, including some beasts like the amygdalas. After fighting my way through, I eventually found my way back out to the streets, which now had these masses of corpses crawling around. The gate had been opened, allowing me to access a much larger portion of the street that sloped downwards, leading me to its end. Moving through an archway, a ritual began, and the moon is eclipsed with a dark fog. Out from this fog comes an old one, the one reborn to be specific. It is a mass of corpses and limbs with no clearly discernible shape. If I am too far away, it shoots blood at me and simply stomps at me if I'm too close. The whole time there were fireballs coming from the witches that summoned this being, but surprisingly it wasn't too difficult, taking only one attempt. At the end of this path was a corpse that transported me back to the second floor of the lecture building. This second floor was a gateway as well to another portion of the Nightmare Realm, called the Nightmare of Mensis. It started leading me up a hill, eventually revealing a grand castle that the very sight of brought me frenzy. Reaching the first floor of the castle led me into a room full of giant spiders hanging from the ceiling. Immediately wanting to leave, I exited to the right onto a moonlit bridge guarded by a hunter that gave me a lot of trouble. I struggled through to find a few elevators that brought me to a circular set of hallways. The nightmare host Mikalash was waiting to trap me here. He didn't fight me directly, rather summoning skeletons around me, and when I chased after him, he ran in the opposite direction. I used this to my advantage to cage him in a room where he couldn't escape, and then confronted him. Now fighting from his corner, he sent bundles of snakes lashing at me and sent large explosions out. His death released me from the hallways and raised a bridge to the final section of the castle. Here I met some nightmare pigs on the way up. But more interestingly, I met again the bloodied bride. She sat near the top of the castle, looking longingly at the peak without moving. I took one last elevator up and reached the nursery of this castle, which, I remind you, is inside a nightmare realm that houses the Old Ones, which implies that this is the nursery of an eldritch being. A carriage sat in the middle of the ruins, and then a raven-black figure descended upon it protectively. Mergo's wet nurse had many blade-ended limbs that it used to imitate a blender with non-stop slashes. Not sure how something like this could be a wet nurse, but I suppose these things defy understanding. It occasionally summoned a cloud of darkness to hide its movements, which included temporarily summoning a clone. Its death gave me 1/3 of an umbilical cord, most likely to the infant she was a nurse to. This becomes more relevant in a minute. As I return to the hunter's dream, the mansion is bathed in flames, and a gateway had been unlocked. You see, at the beginning of the game, we meet an old hunter who resides in the dream. His name is Gehrman. He is one of the first hunters and the creator of the workshop. He resides in the hunter's dream and has been giving light guidance throughout the game. But as the child of the Old Ones was put down, it's time for the hunt to come to its conclusion. But the Old One wants their child, and Gehrman intends to sacrifice himself, staying in the nightmare of the hunt for eternity. And so Gehrman gives me an offer. leave, and end my time as a hunter. But Gehrman has suffered enough. I will remove him from this horrible dream by force. Gehrman stands for the first and last time drawing his weapon. His scythe is the first trick weapon, shortening and extending much like my own. His blunderbuss fires a scatter shot that repels me, but I refuse to allow his suffering any longer. I learn to counter where I can, but even still his health reflects his immortal lifespan, and he moves with a speed unbecoming of his age. But after freeing him from this dream, I face the true nightmare. The driving force behind the hunt. The presence behind every monster in the game. The moon! Or rather, an old one manifesting in this world as the gigantic moon, named the Moon Presence. This eldritch being has subconsciously affected every being in the game and physically mutating the ones who succumb to it. It feeds on the fear and anger from every being, and it revels in the hunt. And this eldritch being is beyond any human to fight. Under normal circumstances, I would be placed as the surrogate for the Old One's child, and be forced to reside in the hunter's dream for all of eternity. But at this point, I am no longer human. Earlier in this playthrough, I picked up an item from the Old Hunter's workshop, called 1/3 of an umbilical cord. And just a minute ago, I picked up another third, dropped by Mergo's wet nurse. And after a quick detour involving this woman who I saved earlier, who was probably a descendant of the Vile Bloods, who gave birth to this monster, and then I killed the monster and she died with it, I obtained the final portion of the umbilical cord. And why do I need this umbilical cord, you may ask? It's from an infant Old One, and upon consuming it, I am no longer human, but rather an embryo, if you will, to become an Old One. And with this new power, I may challenge the Moon Presence for its eldritch existence. The fight echoed many fights from throughout the game. What began with werewolves and continued with every beast from then, they drew their power from the Moon Presence, and so their fighting style resembled their master. As the fight went on, the Moon Presence began to use showers of its blood to corrupt me, but at this point, I cannot be stopped. With the final blow struck, I take unto myself its eldritch powers and transform into this worm thing. The doll who has taken care of me all this time, giving me strength, comforts me one last time. Well, I can definitely say that Bloodborne was one of the weirdest games I've ever played. That worked to its strength, of course. The aesthetic is legendary for a reason, and the combat lives up to the FromSoft reputation. It's not quite as fast as Dark Souls 3, but with the generally lower health, the healing from dealing damage, and the lack of rolling, generally kept me more in the fight without any breaks. Overall, a great experience. Sekiro coming soon, and I'll see you all when I see you next.